We spend too much on our smartphones. This is because of something called diminishing returns. It's when the extra amount that we're spending on something isn't proportional to the extra value that you get out of it. And this is often the case with new phones, especially with their camera performance. I recently did a video showcasing the Samsung Galaxy A35s, one of Samsung's cheapest phones. So it got me thinking, like, what's the camera like on one of Samsung's most popular phones on the market, the Galaxy A35? And since the camera is the biggest reason people buy a phone, I thought, let's take it out for a hard spin. If you find this video helpful, I'm trying to get this channel to 10,000 subs. You could be one of them. I appreciate it. Let's jump into it. The camera system is decent with a triple camera setup, something that you see in a lot of other phones. It's got a 50 megapixel 1.8 aperture wide angle lens with optical stabilization, which is really nice, an 8 megapixel ultra wide lens with a 123 degree field of view, and a 5 megapixel macro lens with a 2.4 aperture. The selfie camera on the front is a decent 13 megapixel wide lens with a 2.2 aperture. Let's take a look at the photos first. The selfie camera it's pretty good, actually. It depends on the lighting conditions that you are taking shots at, but this is amazing to me. This backlit shot just came out so well, and it seems to have a really high dynamic range, which unfortunately doesn't seem to be the trend with this camera. As you can see here, this looks average and blown out, and even when you zoom in, you can see like there doesn't seem to be a lot of darkness in the darkness, if that makes sense. It's just not very contrasty at all, unfortunately. Here's another one, also with the 50 megapixel sensor, and let's just zoom in onto this flower. Like it's crisp, you know, for what it is, being this far away, but zooming in, you can start to see how there is just a lack of quality. But from the outset, it actually is a pretty good photo, just from the original one. Here we go as well. Shooting in the shade, there is actually a lot of dynamic range in this photo, which is really cool. There's a lot of backlighting over there, but the subjects are obviously in the foreground. That's my wife and daughter. And here's another one with the ultra wide, but as you can see, it just crunches. The ultra wide just crunches those images. And not impressed with that, but to get a good idea of the surroundings, it looks good. Shame. The 1x is great. So this is a picture of my daughter, also in the shade, lots of dynamic range. You can see a little bit of the background is blown out, but it looks really good. We can zoom in there. A lot of people won't even notice, probably. Here's another one from just taking those shots. Remember, she's moving around. I'm not getting a lot of blur, which is really impressive. Here's with the portrait mode. I think the portrait mode is a little bit hit and miss. Here it works very well. I really like this photo. Again, she's moving around a lot. She's not a still child, so to get this as crisp as it is, it's great. Obviously her hair is not in this photo. There's her hat that's kind of creating that silhouette, but I think it looks really good. Here's a really nice example of what I was talking about the dynamic range and how we can fix it. So here is shadows, trees on a river, and here's another shot I took of the same thing, except I dropped the exposure when I shot. So you hold down your finger and you take the sun and you dial that down a little bit. And I think this is a much better, moodier shot than the one on the left. But it's all up to taste. Obviously, you're losing a little bit of detail, and that's why the left one is pushing out all that detail. But I really wanted to catch what it felt like to be there, and that's what you get when you look at the image on the right. Here's another example of the river with that shadow and looking a little bit more dynamic and extreme. Dramatic photos look so much better than ones that are just kind of like splattered. This is some of the most zoomed in shots, but they look terrible. This is completely grainy. I'm standing quite far away from Jess and Jamie, but look, as you can see, it looks like an old, like an old Polaroid camera, but like not in the cool way. Just avoid zooming in, rather crop in if you can. Here's another example of how good this portrait mode is. I love the way that it looks. Again, it's a little bit iffy. I have to take a lot of shots to get the right look, because the AI sometimes doesn't do what it's supposed to do. But I think this is pretty good for a pretty entry-level mid-range phone. Here we can have a look at Jamie in the grass, and this bamboo forest of sorts, and you can see like that's where the highlights and the darkness kind of like mashing in together. But there is a lot of detail in the shot, which is really nice, and it's kind of retained that detail. The macro lens is really cool. So this is a dragonfly we found. I've taken quite a few pictures of this dragonfly because it just let me, very rarely. I've dropped the exposure here just to try get it looking a little bit more dramatic, but it's losing a lot of those details. I'd rather be able to edit it in post, and it looks really, really good. Here's another beetle. I forgot what this thing is called, but sitting on a flower also allowed me to get in close. This thing is tiny, okay, and I managed to get a really good crisp photo with that macro lens, and I'm very impressed with that. Here's another example of that 50 megapixel sensor looking as good as it does. There's a lot of detail here that is coming through. It's very crisp. There's the grass, the trees in the background, the texture of the hat. I'm really impressed with some of these. I think the core thing, and I think this is really important for a lot of these kinds of cameras, is the lighting conditions. And I think the lighting conditions were kind of perfect this day that we took these shots. I think these look really, really good. Here's another portrait mode selfie. Tried my best. This is where it gets a little bit iffy. It's getting a lot in shot here. Just bear in mind how difficult the shot actually is, because there's a lot of backlight with the sun directly in the lens. And it's getting me and Jamie, and it's being completely blown out, and it's doing a pretty good job of putting us into the picture. Where the fallout actually happens is making sure that it's, it doesn't just get me, but it gets Jamie as well. Here's with portrait mode off. You can't see Jamie, that sun flare is in the way, but it's cool. It's a cool shot. Here I moved it out of the sun, and yeah, obviously a much better shot. It's not as washed out. This photo of Jamie is kind of testament to how it does with movement, and anybody that's got kids or dogs are going to really appreciate this. Jamie is moving quite fast, and it's got a really good picture of her. Here is the ultra wide in like brilliant settings, and I think it looks really good. Just don't zoom in on anything too much. It's not going to look great once you zoom in, but getting that kind of detail in the gravel on the ground, and just the color replication of the sky, it's done a really, really good job, and it's catching quite a wide field of view. That 123 degrees field of view it shows. Now lighting conditions are key. This one is of Jamie underneath like an umbrella. I am using the 3x lens here, and it's really struggling to replicate the color, and it's actually like degrading these shots a little bit. I feel like her skin is a lot softer than it should be, and look, it could be a much, much better shot. This one of Jamie with the portrait mode somehow fixed it. Remember, it's the same location, but it's not the 3x zoom lens. This is the 1x. I'm a little bit closer, and these look absolutely incredible. I loved this little photo set of her eating this cake, and we're probably going to frame some of these pictures. I mean, they're that good. But the portrait mode doesn't always get what you want it to. So here's a photograph of Jess, and it actually kind of failed here. It's struggling to identify the background. Can you see the person in the background is looking a little, it's actually all over the background. The person directly behind her is somehow in focus a little bit, and the woman on her right is somehow in focus. I think it thinks the chair and her are equidistant. And Jess's glasses aren't in focus in the one section, which is very strange. This one kind of got a little bit right. So it's got her as the subject much better, but this guy in the background, he's in focus somehow. That's not how portrait mode should work. And then with the regular lens, again, the color replication in the under this red umbrella, it's still struggling. But at the same time, it's not a great place to take a photograph, and it's kind of my fault. That's kind of what it looked like, but it did better with her on the 1x than it did with Jamie with the 3x. Here I tried dropping the exposure a little bit to get some of that overexposed stuff out of the way in the background, and it looks good. It's very sharp. It's a lot sharper than it is when it's all blown out, but I think it looks relatively good. It's not the best photograph, but that's me as the photographer. But as far as the camera goes, it's doing its job. This is a better exposure, and again, it just goes to show that some of the things just really struggle. It's like you get, it's not as consistent as I'd like it to be, and I think that's kind of like the lesson here. The photos are not consistent. Take as many photos as you can to get that perfect shot. Here's some photos of the garden. I really try to focus in on this plant in the foreground. Really struggled at the beginning, but I eventually got it, and it looks really good. This is also with the one times, and I'm managing to really capture this flower, and it got a really nice natural bokeh as it goes through to the back, better than it does with the portrait. Later that afternoon, we went to go to 80K to watch some Overwatch. There was a tournament that was going down, and it was indoors. So it's an esports arena. It's a little bit indoors. There is a lot of natural light, so I was very disappointed with this shot. The low light from this camera is not great. And you'll see, this isn't even low light. This is literally us. There's a much better shot, less movement. But everything from the colors just seem very dull and muted. And I'm not sure if that's just a direction that Samsung have started to take, maybe with criticism from them being oversaturated. But it would be nice if they just looked they popped a little bit more. There is some grain in the shadows, especially on the couch. Like, it doesn't really know what that is. And again, it's struggling to really like take moving photos indoors, which is really weird. And this is with the front-facing camera. There we go. That's a much better shot with the selfie camera. I've just kind of like pulled it back a bit so we can get more light on my face and more light in the background, and it seems to be doing a much better job. This is with portrait mode, and this is why it's a bit iffy sometimes. Jamie and I are on the same plane, same focal plane, and Jamie's in focus, but I'm not. Like, it's like I don't exist in the shot, which sucks. Benefit is that you can edit these in the gallery app to make sure that you can pull that focus all the way back, but that sucks a little bit. You know, you want to be able to have like proper bokeh. Still not getting my focus. Just whipped it around to take a photograph of the screen. There's a lot of different kinds of light here, and it seems to be doing a pretty good job. This is a terrible location to take photographs, and it seems to capture the moment pretty well. Here I'm trying the 3x zoom, and it seems to be doing a great job here. Look at the text, but again, it's just a little bit dull. I mean, these are comic book covers. It could be a little bit like, it could pop a little bit more. But there's something different. I can't put my finger on it, but there's something different between the S24 Ultra and the A35. But it's not a bad photo, and these are completely usable photos, you know, for a fraction of the price of the S24 Ultra. Now, onto video. The cameras on the back allow you to shoot 4K at 30 frames a second or 1080p at 60 frames a second. Instead of optical stabilization, it's got gyro electronic stabilization. Let's take a look at the footage. I'm pretty impressed with the video. Again, it seems to replicate the footage really well in the right lighting conditions. I think that this would be challenging, in my opinion, having such a wide dynamic range between the background being completely blown out and us being completely in the shadows. This is hard to do with a DSLR camera, just generally if you know manual settings, and it seems to be doing a great job. This is zoomed in a little bit. I think it's the 3x zoom where I was standing, and it's surprisingly a much better like close-up shot than I got with Jess and Jamie with the photographs. It's tracking the dogs really well. It's still usable footage. Try to get a little bit cinematic and show what the light looked like behind the trees, and yes, it looks great. The color replication of the trees and green, Samsung really have got that down, and there's a lot going on. I really like the lens flare on this, which is great. Here is that 10x zoom. I'm so sorry. It looks like a VHS player. Here's some of the autofocus moving away from the tree, and it does a great job snapping in there. Here's Jamie in 4K, and it looks good. It looks really good. Just like the photograph, this scene for some reason does really well with these phones. Even though she's a little bit backlit and there's a lot of detail on the shot, Samsung seems to really understand and interpret this very, very well. So back to this shot when we're under the red umbrella, and I think that we are much better using the video under these conditions. I know you can also snap a photograph or take a still out of a frame from a video if you want to use a photo, and yeah, it shows. This footage looks great, especially in comparison to the images. I mean, look at Jamie's hair and how crisp it looks. Here are some of the flowers, just trying to get some of the close-up footage that I can. It's really hard to maintain focus, but once you do, look at the lock-on focus here. So this is the autofocus just kind of locking onto the flowers, and it looks good. Now back to the Overwatch tournament. I think that the footage here, again, looked better than the photographs for some reason. It's a little bit more consistent, less unpredictable. And this is a shot of Jamie in a in the dark, essentially. Like, I'm blocking all of the main light, and it seems to be doing a great job. There's less noise in the background, and it's just like a much better, even the still frames are much better than the photographs. I'm just zooming in a little bit and just to see what it looks like on that screen, and just kind of playing with the exposure, and it looks okay. It's a really hard subject to use. It's probably a bad example of what it's capable of. This is a pan of the whole room. I did not think this footage was going to come out great, and it comes out pretty well. Movement struggles a little bit, but it's still usable. It was extremely dark in that room, so that's a saving grace. So I took out the front-facing camera in the same location, literally directly afterwards. It's dark and it looks horrendous. So I just the inconsistency between some of the lenses, it's not good. I think the front-facing camera really struggles, although it's 13 megapixels, to work in a dark environment. I would probably flip the phone around and try to take some photographs that way, or get a friend to take photographs of you. In conclusion, these are kind of like my final thoughts. I am extremely impressed just in general with what's capable with the A35, and like in comparison to what I'm getting with my S25 Ultra. Obviously there's no comparison to a lot of these things, but sometimes some of this footage is kind of indistinguishable, and that's a really good testament to what this is capable of. My biggest concern actually is that this is a way more reliable camera than what's on the A35. So although we are able to actually get like comparable shots and in different locations and in certain instances, like you've got to take a lot of photos in order to make sure, or a lot of video in order to make sure that you actually get the thing that you want to get. The average day-to-day person is not producing video like, you know, myself, or potentially you watching this video is doing. So most people don't take tons of photos of a situation or of a video event, and then they'll just get these really inconsistent finishes. But if you're prepared to take that into your stride, I think it's really interesting that there is a remarkable price difference between these two devices, and what the A35 is doing is just pretty bonkers. Whether you upgrade to an A55, which I think is better, we've done a whole video video review of that, it's up to you. But the A35, as far as its camera goes, is pretty good. You just have to work around some of its weaknesses. What did you think of the footage? And are you thinking of picking up an A35? Let me know in the comments. I'll see you in another video. Cheers.